Good evening. Welcome to Zion's Banner. There are some advantages to the new YouTube interface. There are also some disadvantages to the YouTube interface, so I will negotiate those. Uh, Finding the ingestion settings was a little curious, but we live and we learn. So we've got kind of an interesting show. Um, I'm going to have the Detractors Corner up when we get into it a little bit so that we can hear Dr. Singer with the disclaimer that I am not here to praise his position. I am here to evaluate it and show where it falls short. So I'm going to go to the camera plus our situation here so you can see the PowerPoint as we go through it. Tonight's topic, what does Judaism teach about hell? So let's get right into it this evening. Okay. Let me give you that Jewish answer again. Does Judaism teach hell? Yes and no. Not in the way faith in Messiah focuses on eternal destiny because of its relationship to the kingdom of God. New covenant, additional revelation, and also the rabbis did not come to a really cool, neat consensus. You know the old joke about 3 Jews, 4 opinions. Well, that's especially true with rabbis. And so we do not have a consistent, very clear teaching. That does not mean we have no teaching. However, the doctrine of hell is consistent with Second Temple Judaism, which it came out of and spoke to. So we're asking the wrong question if we say, does Judaism teach hell in one sense, in the sense that is there a well-developed doctrine of hell agreed on by all the rabbis in all the branches of Judaism? And to be intellectually honest, that would be not true. However, the real question is the doctrine of hell, which occurs in the New Testament, totally consistent with Judaism, particularly of the Second Temple period, which is when those writings were indeed being given. And so Tovia Singer is going to present his complaint in relationship to the doctrine of hell. So we're going to give him the floor and be intellectually honest, and I'm going to go and let him have that floor with the all-important disclaimer that I am not here to agree with his position, but I am here to let that position be heard. So we're going to move on in just a second here. I'm going to go to the next slide. And we're going to go ahead and hear that next slide. Let me click on that.
Caller, welcome to the show. You are live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
This is Robert from Austin.
Hello, Robert.
How y'all doing?
Doing good. How are you?
Good, good. Hello, Rabbi. How are you?
Shalom, doing very well, thank you.
Good, good. Rabbi, I was wondering how the idea of a hell crept into the Christian mind in their theology. If Judaism doesn't have that in there, there's no like when you die you go to hell or you go to heaven and your soul will be judged. I'm wondering where the idea of there's a place called hell that has fire and brimstone and it's an eternal place of damnation. I'm wondering where that came into their thought processes on where the soul goes after death.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, that is a great question, by the way. So go ahead and hang up now. You can tune in for your answer, okay?
Okay, thank you, guys.
I'm surprised it took so long for someone to ever ask a question like this. How did the concept of heaven and hell creep into Judaism? After all, if you look in Tanakh, it would be very hard to find. Gehenna, I'm just using that term because I just need to use conventional language, is a place where typically somebody would go who dies with some sin, and that sin has to be atoned for after a person dies. Now, we find this in Isaiah chapter 22, verse 14. But it's very, very rare that you would find any description of the afterlife in Tanakh. It's there, but you really would have to know where to find it. The resurrection of the dead, it's there. Isaiah 26, verse 19, Daniel 12, verse 2. But it's scant what happens to your soul after you die. It descends up to heaven after the body is buried. Where? Ecclesiastes 12, verse 7. It's there, but very rare. In other religions, and I'm talking about Christianity in particular, it's all over the place, on every page, up and down, heaven, hell. And of course, the threat is that if you don't follow Christianity, you're going to go to hell. If you look in Tanakh, you'll find there's just a scant mention of this. It's there, but it's only inferred from the text. The question is, what is going on here? Now, I want you to listen very carefully. If you are God and you are writing a Torah, the word Torah means teaching, and you want people to live according to these teachings, that's what the word Torah means. The Torah, therefore, is an instruction manual for mankind. And you want to show that if you follow the Torah, you're going to be blessed in a certain way so that you know how to guide your life. Well, now, you're God. What would you do? Think about it. Would you say to people, if you don't listen to me, you're going to go to hell? And if you listen to me, you go to heaven? You wouldn't even waste your time with that. Why? Because it's unverifiable and it's unfalsifiable. It's silly. What you would do is exactly what the Torah says. The Torah tells you the following. If you do not follow my way, Hisham l'cha, be careful. If you don't follow my ways, this is what I'm going to do. Remember, you're God. You are not only the creator of the heavens and the earth, you control the heavens and the earth. And therefore, you could say, look, if you sin, I'm going to stop the rains. What effect will that have? The land is not going to give forth its fruit. You're going to starve, and then you're going to be forced to turn back to me. I'm going to send you into exile. You're going to be there for 70 years, but you're going to return then, and I'm going to send you again. Now, if you're not God and you're writing a Bible, you don't want to ever include this kind of stuff. Why? Because you have no control over the rains. You have no control over the seasons. You have no control over the fertility of the land. So therefore, false religions, heaven and hell are all over the place. And think about, let's say you and I decide, you know what, no matter what you do for a living, religion is really where it's at as far as money goes. If we were going to write our own Torah, we were going to write our own fake Bible, what would we do? Well, we can't tell people that if you don't do what we tell you to do, that's going to stop raining because we have no control over the rain. We wouldn't tell people that the land is not going to give forth this fruit because we're just making this stuff up. So what would we have to appeal to? We'd have to appeal to something that's unverifiable. Most importantly, we'd have to tell them, after you die, you're going to go to hell if you don't listen to me. If you listen to me, you're going to go to heaven. That's so perfect. Why? Number one, we're addressing man's greatest fear. What happens after you die? This is frightening. Moreover, you can't check it. Like, what are you going to do really? How are you going to test this out? Are you going to go to Home Depot, buy a shovel, go to the nearest cemetery, dig up a grave, open the casket and say, hey, buddy, Harry, what happened? This big cross on your coffin. How did it work out? That can't be. That will never happen. When a religious document is just front-loaded with heaven and hell, just all over the place, you could be certain this is a man-made document, because if you are God, why would you appeal to that? It's unverifiable. If the book is trying to get you to repent, the book would tell you what's going to happen along the way. An example, people who care about public health, they're going to warn cigarette smokers that not only you're going to almost certainly die a horrendous death, but there'll be a series of events that you're going to suffer, maladies that you're going to endure, coughing, shortness of breath, and these are all indicating that you're in a lot of trouble. And here's the good news. If you quit smoking, in about 5 years, your body is very likely to completely recover, and you will then have the same statistical health outlook as though you never smoked. That's an amazing thing, and it's verifiable. So if God wrote a Bible, if God writes it, he doesn't have to appeal to heaven, hell to skip. That's the false religions need to do that. The true religion, if it's written by God, why would God ever appeal to heaven and hell? Why would he do that when he could just affect the world around us and we would immediately get the idea, oh, I'm out of breath, I have to quit smoking. And there is
Caller, welcome to the show.
Okay, let's start dealing and unpacking this stuff. He is definitely out of line in a few places, but let's take this apart. First of all, let's deal with his argument. His argument is essentially that there is evidence that Christianity is a false religion, and that because it's using hell, and that's a scare tactic. Judaism didn't need it, so there's little mention of the afterlife. Now, we're going to take this totally apart because there are a ton of problems with this. I'm going to put up a URL if I can get to it tonight before we're done and see if I can actually pull this off, because Dennis Pranger actually has a YouTube video stating that as an Orthodox Jew mind you, that if there is a God, there's an afterlife. And he points to some things that we're going to talk about in this video. But let's just get down to the way this is and start taking this apart. So we've looked at his argument, so let's ask some questions. Now, whenever you come to a worldview, what you need to do is ask questions, look for the assumptions that are being made, and then ask questions, and then by dealing with those questions, you can very logically and very effectively dismantle. By the way, someone said they just came from Vocab Malone, my buddy, who talks about asking questions when doing evangelism. This is right along those lines. And so I should get him to link me and me link him, but this is just very much a good tactic. If Judaism taught divine judgment in the afterlife, and it's true, and Christianity is false for teaching divine judgment, doesn't this make Judaism false also? If Judaism taught divine judgment in the afterlife, and it's true, and Christianity is false for teaching it, that would make Judaism false too. Does God really avoid teaching divine judgment in the afterlife because it's unverifiable? Is that why God doesn't do it? Because only false religions would do it because they're making a claim that can't be proven. But God would never do this because he knows it's unverifiable. And so he would never teach divine judgment in the afterlife. This is clearly an assumption that is just littered in his conversation. If Daniel clearly proclaims divine reward and punishment, how can Judaism refute Daniel's clear teaching? I mean, that's a really good question. If Jesus and his followers believe the clear teaching of Daniel the prophet, then did Daniel's revelation, which he gave the Jewish people, not uphold his teaching on eternal punishment? Now, that's a very Jewish way of putting it. Let me put it in a more front-loaded, less Yiddishism sort of way. If Jesus was following the clear teaching of Daniel, then Daniel's teaching verifies Jesus' teaching on hell. Okay? So these are the questions we've got to interrogate his worldview with and look at it. So let's get going here, okay? Now, first of all, and I'm going to try to put an end screen. I've started creating end screens that links back to the video on is believing in Jesus as bad as or like smoking crack. Because in that video, he states that believing in Jesus is worse than crack because crack only affects you in this life, but believing in Jesus will affect you in the world to come. Now, wait a minute now. If there's no divine punishment and no divine reward, then believing in Jesus cannot hurt you in the world to come, in the afterlife, in any way, shape, or form. So what Singer is doing is threatening Christians with hell in one video and then denying or stating that teaching hell and emphasizing it is the proof of a false religion. Well, by that claim, he's just proved he follows a false religion. I mean, this is totally self-defeating given his other videos. I wonder if he pays attention to what he says in his other videos. Because it's literally what he threatens Christians with in one video and then says, well, threatening people with hell is the proof of a false religion. And you can link back to that, but I'll try to put that link in. The rabbis even realized that this idea that only in this life can God go ahead and reward and punish because it's verifiable, and if he's giving instruction and trying to get people to come back to him, he isn't going to use anything that's unverifiable, is absolutely crazy. Let's take the JPS, Jewish Publication Society Guide to Jewish Traditions, first edition, page 116, discussing the world to come, or the Olam Haba, which is what it's called. Okay, the rabbis realize that the biblical principle that people are either rewarded or punished in this life for good or bad deeds seem to be in contradiction with ordinary experience. Go figure, Rabbi Singer. The problem of why innocent people suffer and wicked prosper in this life is especially presented in the book of Job. By the way, part of the Tanakh, appearing to be an enigmatic mystery that could not be understood only by the wisdom of God, the rabbinical solution was the concept of the resurrection of the dead, which involved eternal punishment or eternal reward. In other words, reward in the afterlife. People will die, they will eventually be resurrected, and they will receive reward or punishment based on what they did. This is the JPS Guide to Jewish Traditions. To counter this, he must either argue that Eisenberg's JPS Guide article on page 116 is really the doctrine of a false religion and misrepresents Judaism, or he must argue that the concept of the resurrection of the dead had nothing to do with the world to come and divine reward and punishment, which he cannot do. So this is like ridiculous. But let's keep moving along. Let's go to where the Talmud threatens people with eternal punishment and separation from heaven or the world to come. Am I making this stuff up? No, this is Jacob's Neusser's English translation of the Mishnah, Sanhedrin 10:1. This is very interesting stuff. These are the ones who have no portion in the world to come, who will be separated from God in the afterlife. He who says the resurrection of the dead is a teaching not derived from Torah. And the Torah does not come from heaven and the Epicurean. So what the Talmud is essentially saying is, if you want to be separated from God in the afterlife and have no portion in the world to come, the way to do that is to believe one of these three things. The resurrection from the dead is not in the Torah does not come from heaven, it's not God's word, and be an Epicurean, which was a certain Greek philosophy. So here's where we're going with this whole thing. The Talmud itself threatens people with eternal punishment in the life to come. Obviously, this proves that the Talmud is teaching a false religion, that it is a made-up thing by men that is inconsistent with the Tanakh. I mean, if I'm following his reasoning correctly, anything that threatens punishment in the world to come is somehow false religion. This is the Talmud. It's threatening people with punishment in the world to come, the Olam Haba. What happens to Rabbi Singer's reasoning then, I wonder? But let's go further still. Let's look at divine judgment as a classic doctrine of a key doctrine of classic Judaism. This is the 11th article of Moses Maimonides' 13 articles, or the Rambam's 13 articles. This appears in the Jewish prayer book and is part of morning prayers. What does this article say? God rewards good and punishes transgression. By the way, Rambam did not mean this in the sense of this life only, because he also states there will be a resurrection of the dead. Hasi, middle of the 12th century, Eskol HaKafar, this author lists 10 articles of faith for Judaism. Let's go down to number 9 and 10. There will be divine judgment, and God will meter out judgment and reward. It seems as though Maimonides and Hadassi seem to believe in divine punishment. So it's kind of silly to argue that Judaism doesn't teach any sort of divine punishment in the world to come. But let's move on to the Jewish prayer book, the blessing against the heretics. You'll see some Talmudic references, Berachot 28b, and you will see the Jerusalem tractate listed. Okay, prayer against the heretics and Sadducees and transducers, informers, and traitors. That's quite a list, isn't it? Okay, let's get into this. May no hope be left to the slanderers. May the wicked perish as in a moment. May all thy enemies be cut off. That would be from, ooh, wow, that's like really intense. Speedily uproot the haughty and shatter and humble them speedily in our days. Strike down our enemies and humble the haughty. You mean their tomato plants won't grow? Is that what's really being stressed here? This is really pretty threatening language, isn't it? Now, this gets really funny, okay? His whole argument is God would never use a divine judgment in the world to come. Obviously not, because it's not verifiable. We saw this quote before, but I've included the rest of the quote. The rabbis realized that the view that reward in this life only, since it is verifiable, is really dumb. And we're going to deal with some reasons, but let's just go on. Okay? Let's go down to the black part. Rabbi Jacob remarked, there is no reward for the precepts, virtually fulfilling the mitzvot in this world. Really? That would probably be Kiddushim 39b, while several Talmudic statements indicate the righteous will receive their reward when? In the world to come. 11a of the Talmud tractate listed. Now, what's interesting about this is you can't have divine reward if you don't have divine punishment, or God becomes unjust. Because if I reward bad and good equally, I am no longer a just judge. So I have to assume that given these two tractates, Kiddushim 39b and the other tractate, that the righteous receive their reward, by the way, for keeping the mitzvahs in the world to come, means one of two things. Either there's divine punishment in the world to come, which ties directly back into the doctrine of hell, or God rewards good and evil equally, which makes him unjust. Where do you want to go with that? That presents a real problem, doesn't it? So, new? Hell is in keeping with the divine judgment concept of Judaism. Threats are made in the Talmud and in the prayer book that directly relate to divine punishment in the world to come, which is exactly what hell is all about. And verifiability doesn't seem to keep the rabbis from saying this. Now, let's talk about why this is. There are periods in Jewish history where the afterlife and punishment in the afterlife is far more discussed. Generally, they are periods of persecution. Okay? Now, let's think about this for a minute. If I'm living in the land and the punishments and rewards are directed at the nation, but later on I am outside the land and I am outside the place of God's security and blessing, which is what the land represented, and I'm seeing my persecutors prosper while I indeed am suffering outside of the land, then it makes sense that there would be more emphasis on the need or on reward for individual piety, because the community is not where they're supposed to be. Now, let's do this. I didn't tell the story, but I want to go ahead and tell the story. I think it comes up later on, but I'll save it. Someone asked if the world to come is the kingdom. It includes, there's not a clear distinction between eternity and the Messianic kingdom. In other words, the rabbis don't make a clear statement as to where the Messianic kingdom and eternity end. The idea is that the Messianic kingdom goes on into eternity. We know that there's a distinction in premillennial thinking between the reconstituted earth and then the eternal state. The rabbis were less clear about that. So yes, we do have more information, but it is consistent with what came before. So let's go now to the Jewish apocryphal writings. 2nd Ezra 7, 47 and 48. Now let's see, the world to come will be a delight to few, but a torment to many. Why would this be so, I wonder? For an evil heart has grown up in us, which has alienated us from God. Wow, sounds almost like some parts of the New Testament, doesn't it? And has brought us into corruption and ways of death, and has shown us the path of perdition, and removed us from life. That is not merely for a few, but for almost all who have been created. 2nd Ezra 7, 47 and 48. Now you may think that 2nd Ezra was written by a Christian rock group, but let us find out. 2nd Ezra, also known as 4th Ezra, is apocryphal writing that is a Jewish apocrypha. Now, is it inspired? No, but it does tell us the thinking of the people during the Second Temple period and what was table discussion and what was going on. The Semitic, apparently Hebrew original, was composed in the year 90 in all respects, a typical apocalypse of the theological type. That refers to the genre. It's apocalyptic writing, of which it is the best specimen. Interesting. The instruction in hidden things here has chiefly to do with matters of religion and faith. Teaching by allegory is a predominant feature. The influence of Daniel, referred to by name in 12:11, is very noticeable. In other words, the apocryphal writing is focusing on Daniel. So, we're looking at apocryphal writing. What was around during the Second Temple period? And what we're going to see is that it's perfectly consistent. And I'm just going to... There we go. Just wanted to throw out a quick hi to Radical Love. I do that. We're a little bit more community. It doesn't boost my YouTube numbers maybe, but hey, it's a great way to be. Okay, let's keep moving on. And then there's some things that make it apocryphal writing, okay? Dreams, visions, and signs, messianic predictions, general resurrection, and last judgment. Go figure. Extended account of the condition of souls after death. This was part of apocryphal writing. Rabbi, is apocryphal writing part of the Jewish canon? Yes, it is. So why are you saying that only false religions teach about judgment after death? Which is what you just kind of blathered about for a while. I mean, you know, you were a little bit violently opposed to the idea of any sort of judgment after death. Now let's visit Daniel. He makes out like this occurs in very few places, and you know, like this is some sort of Christian invention. I mean, no one ever discussed divine judgment prior to, and so you know, that's what he kind of infers here, and really kind of bashes at Christianity for saying such things. And so let's just check this out and see if this is indeed the case. Okay, let's look at Daniel here. At that time, Michael, the great prince, the protector of your people, shall arise, and there shall be a time of anguish which has never occurred since the nations came into existence. But at that time, your people will be delivered. Everyone found written in the book, interesting language here. Many of those who sleep in the dust shall wake, some to what? Everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Is this a New Testament writing? Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the sky and lead many to righteousness like the stars forever. Daniel 12, 1 through 3. Now, he says it's in Daniel. It doesn't occur much, But see, if Daniel's mention of an afterlife, which is unverifiable, is something that God would never do, then why does God do it? And if it's something God doesn't want us to know, then why does he let Daniel know it? And if it is the sign of a false religion, then is Daniel now promoting a false religion? I mean, these are the questions we have to ask. Okay? Now, he is right. There is not a clear picture of the afterlife. By the way, he ignored a word, Sheol, which does talk about the afterlife, and is connected with divine punishment and divine comfort. And Sheol is used. And so he ignored the term Sheol and immediately went to Gehenna. Both terms are used of the afterlife. During the Second Temple period, Sheol was used quite a bit. Why is there so little information? Well, we hinted at this, okay? Let me tell you a story to kind of make this clear. And I hope you're listening to this story, because let's say there are two Jewish people in Auschwitz. Auschwitz was a concentration camp, okay? And let's say there's two Jewish people in Auschwitz. Can you imagine one Jewish person turning to the other Jewish person saying, hey, look, I don't want to put a false religion on you, so I don't want to talk to you about the afterlife, but I want you to know that God really appreciates, it's one Jewish person talking to another, your observance. I notice that you try to keep the law the best you can and keep the mitzvot, and you get up and you pray. And I want you to know that God really appreciates your piety. So here's how you know God appreciates your piety. The scenery at Auschwitz and the fact that the gas chamber will be so nicely decorated. Can you imagine some Jew saying that to another Jew? Is that not absurd? That is like crazy. So if you're going to tell somebody who's in a concentration camp that, you know what, there's really no eternal reward or punishment, but God has given you instruction on how to live your life and guard your life, you should be happy with that. Never mind that while you were guarding your life, God's only way to go ahead and show his pleasure and his honoring of your obedience is how nice the concentration camp is. That is like absurd. That is like absolutely crazy. What you would be asking yourself is, does God see me? Does he know I'm here? Does he care I'm here? Does he honestly gonna bring about some justice? Where is the justice in this? Is God ever gonna deal with this great evil? Is he going to let evil go on, and is there going to be no ultimate victory for good in this world? I mean, these are questions. What happens to me when I die? I'm going into a gas chamber. We're not in Israel. We're not in the land. I'm not going to see the land if I go in that concentration camp. But I should be happy because there's no judgment or reward in the afterlife. That would be false religion. No, apocryphal writing is something that God gives as far as revelation during times of persecution to encourage the faithful that there will be an overthrowing of evil and judgment in the eternity and a reward in eternity. And that's why you don't see it as much, because God was dealing with Israel more corporately, and he was giving the promises to the nation. But in times of persecution, God encourages the faithful. Daniel's written to encourage the Jews in exile to not give in and to maintain what God's given them. And they aren't in the land enjoying the blessings. In fact, they're under divine discipline. So this is kind of crazy thinking here. It's thinking that even Dennis Pranger doesn't fully buy. Okay? But wait a minute, hell isn't verifiable. So God can't use it because hell isn't verifiable. And he would never use anything that wasn't verifiable. Because why would you do that? Well, first of all, hell is verifiable. You know how God verifies the prophets? And this is something that Rabbi Singer doesn't seem to be grasping. God verifies the distant prophecies of the prophets by partially or completely fulfilling some of their prophecies sooner. So when God wants to verify something greatly in the distance, he verifies it by indeed fulfilling things that the prophet said that are more present or more connected to the present. And the argument is, if I made these things happen which Daniel predicted, then these things which Daniel predicted which haven't happened will happen. That's the way prophecy works. And so partial or complete fulfillment of prophecy is the means for verifying later prophecies. So is there verification? Yes. The verification comes from the fulfilling partially or completely of some prophecies which verify the other prophecies. What does this do for me with Daniel? Well, it's real simple. Divine punishment mentioned by Daniel is verified by the fulfillment of Daniel's other prophecies and is not unverifiable at all. If what Daniel said came to pass for some of his prophecies, then his prophecy about eternal punishment and eternal reward is equally verified. See, it seems as though Singer doesn't understand how prophecy works and how God verifies prophets. He seems totally oblivious to this. But beyond this, it seems like Rabbi Singer's advocating a faith without faith, contrary to statements in Judaism. Now, why do I say that? Faith isn't about God only saying things that can be verified by human beings through observation. That's not faith, that's sight. Neither is it about believing God only because something can be verified. I'm sorry, I don't believe you, God. This can't be verified, but I have faith. That's not faith. God, you can't say that because I can't verify it, so I don't have to believe it. Well, that's not faith either. So what Rabbi Singer seems to advocate is a faith without faith. This is even contrary to statements in Judaism. Let me go to a Talmud tractate, Makot 24a, where there's a discussion over the number of commandments which absolutely necessarily have to be obeyed. And in this tractate, quoting Habakkuk 2:4, it says, "Lastly came Habakkuk, and he reduced them," that's the commandments, "to one, as it is said, the righteous shall live by faith." Wow. So it seems as though the Talmud says that the one key passage as to what makes somebody righteous seems to be faith. But faith would not be about believing only what God said that I can verify, neither would it be about God only saying things I can verify. Both of those wouldn't be faith. So it seems that what Rabbi Singer wants is he's advocating a Judaism that is a faith without faith. By the way, faith that is just a mere obedience and drudgery and faith that is duty without genuine belief and trust is not faith. Okay, the reason for doing what God says is because I believe him about who he is and what he is going to do. Now, he seems to hate Paul, and he does hate Paul, and we'll deal more with his hatred of Paul at a later time, but Paul speaks a lot about hell. But Paul's teaching is right in line with Pharisaic Judaism. So he wasn't teaching anything that wasn't taught in Pharisaic Judaism. Let's prove that. Brad Young, Paul the Jewish theologian, a Pharisee among Christians, Jews, and Gentiles, points this out. In Pharisaic Judaism, the final judgment was understood as a scene where retribution for each individual, as a scene of retribution for each individual. At that time, both body and soul would be revived and judged together. That's what the resurrection of the dead was all about. Which, by the way, means that you have a physical body, according to Pharisaic Judaism, that is judged in union with your soul. How interesting is that? Because it sounds exactly what the Bible is teaching as far as hell. So it would seem that the doctrine of hell is totally consistent with Second Temple Judaism, and it's totally consistent with the idea of judgment and reward in the afterlife, which Judaism teaches. And it does not seem to be at all part of a false religion, made up scripture, made up idea at all. If he wants to go ahead and make that sort of statement, first of all, he needs to utterly repudiate the prophet Daniel and admit that he's teaching a false religion. He needs to repudiate Sanhedrin, which threatens unbelievers with hell. He needs to repudiate any indications of these beliefs which existed during the Second Temple Judaism. And I don't know that he's really prepared to do that. By the way, he also needs to repudiate the Rambam, who says that there will be a judgment and says there will be a resurrection connected with that judgment, by which people who were dead will be risen from the dead to be judged after they lived. I want to use the term afterlife. They died, they get resurrected, they get judged. Again, do the rabbis give us a clear picture of hell? Well, no, there wasn't total agreement. Is the doctrine of hell totally consistent with the apocryphal writings that existed within Judaism and consistent with ideas that occurred in Judaism? Well, we'll get to our conclusion now. Okay? Why doesn't Rabbi Singer like hell? Because unlike Torah Judaism, his Judaism has no atonement. So we're coming up on Yom Kippur, and I thought I'd read something that Rabbi Singer should read in line with Yom Kippur, okay, which is right out of the Hebrew Scriptures. Let me give it to you in the English. Okay, Leviticus 17:11, for the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I've given it to you upon the altar to make atonements for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. Ki nefesh chabatser bidam hiv ve'ani nitantiv lechem al hamitz beach lechafar al nefeshtechem ki hadam hu benefesh yechafar. Rabbi, atonement is in the blood. Of course you don't want to think about hell if you have no blood atonement, because you have no way of being reconciled to God. Torah Judaism would recognize this. This is straight out of the Torah. It's not made up, it's Torah. If you were really into Torah, you would be into this verse. Your answer is to deny eternal punishment because you have no atonement. But let's go further. The emphasis on hell doesn't prove Christianity false, but rather demonstrates that the doctrine of divine punishment, which Christianity inherits, that's the it, from the Scriptures and Second Temple period. In other words, what we see is a continuity between the doctrine of divine punishment in the afterlife and Christianity, not a disconnect. So it doesn't prove anything of the sort. So I'm afraid Rabbi Singer, again, has tried to create a false dichotomy, ignoring teachings in Judaism and even threats in Judaism as far as separation from God and having no portion in his rule and enjoying his presence and blessings in the afterlife, in the world to come. Um, and he has his reasons for doing this, but they have nothing to do with Christianity being a false religion. So let's get some application, okay? A religion which only requires faith for this life fails to provide justice in this life or the next. But make that a refrigerator or magnet saying. A religion that only requires faith for this life fails to provide justice in this life or for the next. You know, Dennis Pranger in his thing, Is There an Afterlife, is very clear. If there's a God, there's an afterlife because there's so much injustice and suffering in the world that there would be the need for an afterlife so that justice could prevail and suffering can be dealt with. And he is an Orthodox Jew. I don't think this sort of emphasis on no judgment in the afterlife would sit well with Dennis Pranger, although he admits he doesn't know what goes on in the afterlife. We have more information, yes. We have a consensus, yes. But nothing we believe is a false religion created by a bunch of guys writing their own Torah. This is an absurd position. Okay. I'm going to go ahead a little bit. Now, I'm going to try to pull something off here real quick. Okay? And I'm going to go here for just a second and see if I can pull up. This is like a little risky here. Pull up Dennis Pranger's life after death thing here and give it to you. Now, admittedly, he says he doesn't know what happens in the afterlife. Okay? Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and provide that. Someone mentioned it. I'm going to just punch it up here. I want you to have this resource. Again, Pranger does not say he knows, okay, what happens at all. Here it is. I'm going to see if I can get the shareable link here. Yay, he's not going to give me the shareable link here. I'm going to click on this for just a second.
Hey, are you tired?
Okay, I'm sorry about playing the ad. I'm just going to get the share here. Good, there's the link. And I'm going to make sure that this is it. Okay, I'm going to put this link in here. I believe it's the correct one. Paste. And I'm going to try to put that in there. Sorry about this. I keep having a problem with putting it in the wrong line. Let me do this. I put it in the emoticon line. Silly me. Okay. I believe that should take you to it. Unfortunately, I have the commercial there. Yes, that should be the right one. It's not going to have a fully orbed thing. But this is an Orthodox Jew saying, hey, look, there has to be life after this life. And one of the reasons is the suffering in this life and the injustice would require, well, look, if the suffering in this life and justice is going to be taken care of in the next life, then I would argue that there has to be divine judgment in the next life. Otherwise, the next life doesn't do any better as far as settling suffering and injustice than this life really did. And so I don't think Pranger goes far enough, but he's an Orthodox Jew, and he certainly doesn't argue against an afterlife and think that that's totally bogus. And so this goes a little further than Rabbi Singer, but my bottom line is to show you that not everyone is poo-pooing an afterlife to the extent that Rabbi Singer seems to be poo-pooing that afterlife. And so I want to give you that to think about. Again, I'm not totally saying Singer's views are, everything that I would want, but clearly they represent that he has this concept in there. He too lacks an atonement, so he can't really think about divine judgment too much, probably without it being a little uncomfortable. Okay, I'm going to kind of switch over here. There was some comments here that would be good. Just to touch upon, yes, the Sadducees did not believe in an afterlife. That is why the Rambam and the Tractate in Sanhedrin says that those who do not believe in the resurrection as being derived from the Torah have no share in the life to come. It's a direct reaction to Sadduceeism. Interestingly enough. So really, what that tractate is doing is threatening the Sadducees with no portion being with God and being blessed by God and enjoying his presence in the afterlife, or hell, essentially. And so that's kind of where that's all at. So that's a look at that. I went a little far afield, but I think that Rabbi Singer really goes out of bounds here. And so I'm just kind of thrilled to see an Orthodox Jew who's conservative, both in his morals and worldview, admitting that there needs to be an afterlife and actually being that clear. Well, I think that about ends the broadcast. Now we can keep chatting for a little bit. And I think we get about 3 minutes. I'm getting used to this, but we'll see what YouTube does for us. I am so glad I saw a bunch of you. So I saw a really great number of you. And I'm going to try to go back and put an end card to the one where he talks about believing in Jesus being bad for this life and the next, so that you can actually go back and see the comment in its context, where he seems to be threatening Christians with divine judgment in the next life.